Hello, everybody. Welcome to Go Global World. I'm Daniel Kislinsky, the founder of this global community. And again, we have an international speaker coming to our community to talk about the global opportunities in different parts of the world. And today I would like to discuss Japan, Japan's startup ecosystem. And for this reason, I invited Yuki, who is a managing partner of Yakumi.co. It's an angel investment platform, and also Yuki is an expert in corporate law and also an angel investor, and he's a startup enthusiast. Well, Yuki, good to have you on our podcast. I'm really looking forward to get some details about Japanese market as an interesting one. So give a few details about yourself and let's get to the topic.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniel, for inviting me to your podcast. I'm delighted to be here. So I'm Yuki Shirato. As Daniel introduced, I started the angel investing platform called Yakumi, Yakumi.co, out of Japan. And I've lived abroad for over a decade in the US, Canada, and the UK in the past. And then I started angel investing in New York, Toronto. I've been a corporate lawyer for about 8 years. I work for a large US law firm while managing my angel investing portfolio companies and advisory platform. So I've been in Japan for 5 years now. I returned to Japan. I'm originally from here, and then I'm seeing a growing number of Japanese startups and more exciting news coming out of Japanese startup ecosystem. So I'm here to share some of the exciting developments in the past 5 years.
Well, exciting to have you here, and great that you have some global mindset. So it's very close to our audience. Our startup founders are curious, learning about different opportunities in around the world. So right now there are different startup visas in the United States, in Europe, in Asia. And so they're exploring like what it is to start a business in this or that country. They're looking at taxation, they're looking for ways of incorporating, and actually what it gives some opportunities in terms of investments, in terms of entering other markets through using this local startup ecosystem. Well, Japan is a known large economy, successful country for many years, and it's also known for its unique culture. Can you tell a few in a few words, like maybe not in a few, what it is now? What is startup ecosystem in Japan now? What it is become?
Sure, I'm happy to. So first, Japanese startup ecosystem is behind many of the counterparts and counterparties in the US or even Europe or in Asia, Singapore. So if you look at the international comparison, unfortunately, Tokyo, which is the biggest and then in capital of Japan, biggest city and capital of Japan, is still behind many of the cities, including some in Asia. So the World Bank actually commissioned a study called Tokyo Startup Ecosystem, which was published last fall, and you can take a look. It's published freely and downloadable on the website. And Japan, Tokyo is actually ranked 25th. And then interestingly, Tokyo is ranked first in terms of R&D. So we are a pretty developed in science and technology, and a lot of Fortune 500 companies spend so much money in science and research and development. Yet they have they have not spawned international global startups out of their advanced technology, which is very unfortunate. And then, like I said, it has been changing. And the number of startups has proliferated, and then also venture capital. The number of venture capitals with asset under management over $100 million has, as far as I know, was non-existent 10 years ago, and now has almost quadrupled to about 10 or more. So this year and the last year have been seeing the record number of venture capital fundraising, as well as the venture capital investing into startups. So the last year's number, tentatively, I got from one of the research institutes in Japan, is close to 1 trillion yen. So you have to take about like 2 zeros to convert into US dollars. So that's about $100 billion, which is not that a big, yet as compared to Silicon Valley or even New York or Singapore, but still it's growing. And it was less than $10 billion not that long ago, like 2015. So it has grown so much so that it's becoming one of the startup cities in the world, and it's been recognized in many publications. So Japan is changing, which is a good sign for international global founders who are interested in entering into Japan market. And then when you think about Japan, there are many ways to approach. So one way is to set up a subsidiary and enter into Japan market full on. And then you would need to incorporate a company as a subsidiary, and then you would need to think about the legal structure of the parent subsidiary, and then also tax and employment, human resources, and so many other aspects to it. And then also there are a lot of global startups that are partnering with the Japanese big corporations. So that's another way to sort of enter Japan market. So depending on what you would like to achieve with this world's third largest economy, there are multiple facets to approach.
Interesting. What kind of startups should go to Japan? For example, if we speak about countries like Russia, those startups would go to Russia that are very much interested in R&Ds, hardware, maybe those who are interested in hiring low-cost labor with high skills. What kind of startups should go to Japan to incorporate in there, in your opinion?
Thank you. That's a good question. So let me give you one example, or actually two examples. So one is a US startup called Finless Foods. They're already not a startup, but when they started in 16 or 17, about 7-8 years ago, I was the first and actually the only angel investor into, which invested into that company. And then they just raised, I think, a series B from a large scale corporation. So what they're doing is to provide the cultured bluefin tuna, so cell cultured bluefin tuna food out of the lab, as well as they're making plant-based fish-like products. And so what they wanted to do with the Japanese, market or customers or the partners is to develop cell culture, the products, a prototype from bluefin tuna, because Japan is the largest consumer market as well as the production market of the bluefin tuna. And then, as you know, the plant-based food as well as the cell culture food are a growing space in the world because of the sustainability concerns, and then amongst other concerns. So what they wanted to do is to team up with the Japanese, companies and customers, and then test out the market, and then make R&D progress. So that was like a really good approach, and the reason to enter into Japan market in one way. So that's one way to approach the Japan market. And then and the other way, there are many ways, but another way that I can give you an example of is the company started by the foreign founders here in Japan. So example, there are many examples, but one example is called Bray Technologies. So they are founded by a Portuguese and Italian PhDs in computer science and theoretical physics, respectively. And they started working at a robotics company in Japan. And then they decided to start up their own company, which provides the optimization tool for design. So they're helping the engineers design products using AI, ML, and other optimization tools. So they are interested in Japanese manufacturers, for example, as customers, because Japan still has a lot of world global corporations like Toyota, Honda, Sony, Panasonic, Canon, Ricoh, and Fujifilm, and many medical device companies as well. So those manufacturers, which are based in Japan, can optimize and accelerate the process by using those optimization tools, and that's like another way to focus on Japan market.
Yeah, so Japan market is a very much corporate market with a lot of powerful corporations that can give their access to the huge resources they have, huge capacities they can utilize. And recently, I've spoken with quite a few large corporations from Japan. One of them was top management from Mitsubishi. And the guys are keeping investing around the world in different startups, and they are creating global ecosystem of Mitsubishi. And so the main office in Japan, they are willing to bring companies into Japan, and so it's also their infrastructure is very much like hardware technology, but also looking at software. Very interesting. Food tech, I agree with you. And those technologies related to corporations, also any supporting industries might be also good ones, as far as I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong. Well,
that's correct.
Thank you. In terms of investment ecosystem for startups, can you give some blurb about that? Like, what are the angel ecosystem in there, venture capital ecosystem, accelerators, incubators? So if you have some information on that.
Of course. So it has grown in the past 10 years. That's for sure. And the number of venture capitals, the large scale, late stage ones, as well as early stage ones, have grown so much. The number and the scale, and then as they grow, the ecosystem, the network, catches up as well. So there is a network effect for sure. And there was no angel investment scene until 4 or 5 years ago, and it's still burgeoning. But I've seen more and more angels who are interested in investing in startups in Japan. And the Japanese government actually introduced a beneficial taxation scheme for angel investors who are Japan tax residents, regardless of your citizenship or nationalities. As long as you pay tax in Japan, you get certain deduction from angel investments, which is a very beneficial and then hugely helpful scheme I've been using. And there are many venture capitals that have specific verticals like SaaS or ESG or a global-minded outbound type of startups. So I think there are a growing number of startups. And then traditionally, historically, the venture capitals were usually funded by large corporations. So they're called CVC, the corporate venture capitals. So you mentioned Mitsubishi, but Mitsubishi also has a bank, one of the largest banks in the world, and then they have innovation partners, and then lots of big companies also have the venture capital arms. which invest in startups. And then there was a kind of disconnect between the headquarters of the large corporations and the venture capital arm of those large corporations. But these days, I think they are more and more integrated, and they have been noticing, a growing number of innovative startups. And so there are a lot of acquisitions by large corporations in Japan of startups, as well as and a scale of over $100 million, which is still smaller than Silicon Valley, but they are a growing number. And also foreign investors as well as foreign companies are buying Japanese startups. So last week it was announced FTX, a cryptocurrency exchange platform, acquired Liquid, which was one of the largest cryptocurrency exchange platform in Japan, and it was a unicorn. So the purchase price was not still announced, I don't think, but I would assume it's over $1 billion. And then PayPal purchased Paydi, which is a buy now, pay later scheme, fintech. I think the purchase price was announced at around $2 billion. That was actually founded by a Canadian entrepreneur based in Japan. So I think a growing number of foreign companies are acquiring Japanese startups, and some of which are founded by foreigners. And also KKR invested in a Japanese startup, purely domestic startup that focused on Japanese customers. And then also Carlyle, and then those big name private equity firms from the US are more and more interested in Japanese startups as a late stage investor. So I think it is an exciting and then growing ecosystem I think I've seen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just met with a few guys in Silicon Valley from Japanese companies, corporations, and they say here in Silicon Valley we take decisions like instantly, but then we have to send all our startups to Japanese headquarters. And then it takes time when they decide, when they go through all the approvals, and it's a slow process, but they're improving.
It is very true. Just let me add, like Japanese corporations are kind of known to have red tapes. Their bureaucratic approval system is notorious. However, once you get to the once you get approval, they commit. So I give you one example. One of the startups I knew personally got commitments, like actual commitments, and then everything was signed, and it was let's say $100 million valuation, and then $20 million committed by so many venture capitals around the world. And after everything was signed, just before the capital was injected, Corona happened, and and then so it was 2020, like in March, April, and then that startup was seeing like a lot of venture capitals withdrawing their capital. They're saying like, oh, LPs are really hesitant. Like, I'm so sorry. This is like, force majeure situation. We are not, able to proceed. We are really, really sorry. Legally speaking, that's a breach, on the part of the VCs. But, at the same time, there's nothing the startup can do. They can't, go after them, legally. But the only startups that, kept their promises, despite the fact they were hit so hard, were Japanese venture capitals and the Japanese venture capital and the Japanese corporation. So once approval is obtained, Japanese companies and venture capitals keep their promises and commit themselves to whatever they agree to. So it's a slow and very cumbersome process to get to that stage, but once you get approval, I think it is you created a very long lasting relationship.
Oh, that's that's what I heard about Asian markets, and especially Japan. Getting in quite hard and slow, but long-lasting relationship will be forever, almost like this. That's a great advantage of Japan, I think. Well, let's speak about the government. What are the benefits of starting a startup from Japan for international founders? For example, government stimulus, preferences for international founders, startup visa, incorporation. So anything on that?
Yes, So the Japanese government is generally in favor of startups, and they're supporting as much as they can. But it's a bit a bit not disappointing, but it's not enough, in my opinion, to entice the global talents, so to speak, to start up in Japan. That said, a lot of local governments are a lot more keen than the central government to entice foreign startups. So Shibuya, for example, which is one of the wards in Tokyo, is one of the most enthusiastic cities or municipalities in Japan to attract global talents. So they have their own platform, and they have a beneficial scheme to help foreigners to set up a Japanese corporation. So they help the incorporation process in English throughout. And then they also support the startup visa for foreign founders. And then, they've been really, really helpful in navigating the Japanese, the red tape and, paper heavy system, and generally speaking. And then Fukuoka and then Aichi and other Osaka, other places too, are trying to attract foreign talents. I actually just spoke with at 500 Global Aichi, a program. So the Aichi prefecture, where the Nagoya is located, teamed up with 500 Global, which is a global incubator accelerator out of San Francisco. And then selected about 20 foreign companies from around the world, and they're running a program to make it easy for them to enter a Japanese market and then team up with the Japanese companies. So Japanese government also has the external organization called JETRO, Japan External Trade, JETRO, and so they are extremely helpful in terms of getting the foreign direct investment into Japan. That's their sole purpose. And then it's directly affiliated with the Japanese central government. So if you ask anything, and they will help you, and then whatever say is literally the Japanese government's promises or policies. So they are really helpful. So there are a lot of resources you can seek help in English. That said, once you enter, a Japanese market, or you want to partner with Japanese companies, it will be definitely helpful to speak Japanese, and then have a local representative or someone who understands the culture and the language. So in that sense, it would be good, to seek help and then keep in touch with the Japanese startup ecosystem and community as well. And I'm more than happy to help in that regard. And then I'm happy to introduce many of my like-minded people.
That's the beauty of our global ecosystem, because we meet people like you are, and all of them are willing to help each other, because this is the power of network. We have people in Saudi Arabia, in United States, Australia, all over the world, and they are like you are. They're willing to help each other. That's how it should be, because we're building something new, and this is the welcoming tech ecosystem. Well, you mentioned a city, Kobe, right? Is it correct?
Yes, Kobe has the 500 global program as well. The one I just did was 500 Aichi. But there is another startup that I've been advising and also invested, called Listen Field, was one of the first participants of 500 Kobe program. And then they recently got a strategic investment from Kubota, which is the world's one of the world's largest agricultural equipment manufacturers. So the founder is a Thai lady who's extremely smart and has finished her PhD in Japan. So she is based in Thailand and Tokyo, in Japan. And then they have clients in Thailand as well as Japan, and then throughout the world, including the US and South America. And then they recently tied up with, the global manufacturer, out of Osaka, which is a great fit. And then I represented Listen Field, legally, but I've been also a shareholder, and it was my absolute pleasure.
That's awesome. I just quickly Googled Kobe and startup ecosystem and the startup visa. So it's quite easy to find on internet steps to get a startup visa to Japan, and the criteria there are pretty simple. As I read here, it's for startup looking to do business in Japan, overcoming the requirements of a business manager visa can be a serious challenge, but the business manager visa requires application to open an office in Japan and either employ 2+ people or invest 5 million Japanese yuan, I don't know, Japanese yen. This can be a deal breaker for many entrepreneurs, but this is already some criteria in place, and there are steps and process. Well, in terms of that, I was thinking, is there any government support for startups entering, like maybe is there any grants that the government is giving for international founders in specific industries? Anything on that?
As far as I know, the Japanese government that doesn't give like a grants per se directly to startups, but
or maybe
sorry.
tax breaks.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, tax breaks, maybe something like this. But
yes. So I think there are a few, like a programs that you can take advantage of in terms of minimizing your taxes or the visa, using a startup visa. So there are certain benefits that you can use, make the most of from Japanese government's help. And then there are a lot of, like a grants available to any company in Japan, regardless of, a foreign, as in like, you have to be a Japanese corporation operating in Japan. But for example, one of the startups I know got a grant in research and development, and then they got the grant from the Japanese government, enhancing a certain research and development, and also another medtech startup I'm advising as well as an angel invested called Aquila Systems. They got the grant from a hospital they are partner with, and then the hospital's grant came originally from the Japanese government. If you go upstream, because obviously they would like to make hospital operations more efficient and optimized. So that's one of the ways you get from the Japanese government's the grants or the subsidies.
Got it. Well, I have 5 more questions before we wrap it up, because so
Sure.
many interesting details you're sharing with us, and it's all nice to hear about every country. We have all advantages, but let's talk about disadvantages. Like, what are the downsides of Japan ecosystem for international startups? Do you see?
Yes. So there are a lot of downsides and not great things in Japanese startups ecosystem, but I do not like to emphasize too much, because I would like to encourage foreign startups and global talents to come to Japan and make this ecosystem even more attractive and then grow together. But that said, I need to answer your questions. So I think one is the I think as I mentioned, Japanese ecosystem, startup ecosystem is behind the counterparts in the US, or some of the Asian cities like Singapore, Shenzhen. So if you come from Silicon Valley, let's say, it's very difficult to find the community. It's not easy. You have to aggressively reach out to people who are interested in startups in whatever way. in Silicon Valley, you meet someone like, and most, like if you go to a house party with like 20 people, let's say, half of them are somehow, connected with some kind of startups. Like, oh, my husband is working for this, or, oh, I'm the entrepreneur, or, oh yeah, my, girlfriend is working for venture capital, like that doesn't happen in Tokyo, right? Most people work large corporations or governments or, pretty conservative, workplaces. So you would need to aggressively seek out, and then reach out to people. And then I think LinkedIn is one of the best ways. And before COVID, there are a lot of events. I hosted it at Monterey event as well, which I had to discontinue. But there was a startup, event calendar. In 2019, and every single day there was some kind of startup, event, held in English, out of Shibuya, Shinjuku, like everywhere. So that was extremely, exciting and to attend and to mingle with those people. And so you have to like aggressively, actively seek out. So that's one downside. Another downside is because of the a smaller scale venture capital. So we don't have like, Sequoia or S16 sets, level venture capitals with billions of dollars. The valuation tend to be lower than, those in the States,
And this
let's
is
say.
typical to many countries. For example,
Yeah.
in Russia, it's like 5 times lower than in the States, maybe sometimes 10x less.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So I think, those venture capitals look at Japan market as a TAM, like, total addressable market, and which is obviously very small as opposed to, if you look at the US, they always think about the, total US market as the world. So that's a lot bigger. And then a lot of capital, around in the United States. So the valuation tend to be like lower, which is probably a downside for foreign entrepreneurs, especially coming out of Silicon Valley, pre-launch, pre-product, startup could be valued at $30 million opposed to, even if you have an ARR of $1 million here, you might get, only like $12 million, valuation, right? So that's a huge gap between here and the Silicon Valley.
It's
so
like in Russia,
that's
in Eastern Europe, they will also give about 10, 12 million in evaluation before they access US market, something around
right. So that's probably similar. So that's another downside. And then third downside is probably, actually, practically speaking, the biggest one is the cultural and the language barrier. So if you don't speak Japanese, like not just the language, but also the culture, it's very difficult to work with Japanese companies, let alone sell to Japanese customers. So, a lot of global companies are extremely successful in Japan, say Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, like all those companies, but they struggled a lot at first, and they built a hugely local team and then made it, a really, really local. So I just noticed recently, like I've been an Amazon Japan user since 2003, but back in 2003 up to 2010, the Amazon was not as popular, as prevalent in Japan at all. There were a lot of bigger competitors. Now still, I think Rakuten is bigger, but there are a lot of shopping malls, that are similar to Amazon, and Amazon, like, spent so, much time and also money to, make it local. And then, so I think you would need to understand the differences between where you're coming from and in Japan. So you need a local partner. So that's the third one. I think those three are biggest downsides, I would say.
All right. So being a foreigner in Japan is not an easy thing, right? As far as I understand. Okay. Well, it's typical to many countries, and I had an interesting, unusual thing, or maybe it's usual. It's hard to say. For example, in Israel, they prefer to invest in Israeli-only founders. What about Japan? Do they prefer to invest Japanese founders first, or are they looking for international ones the same way, like more on business side?
Not necessarily. So a lot of companies that advise and angel invest out of Japan are actually founded by foreigners. So Listen Field I just mentioned, which was founded by a Thai lady, which was invested by Kubota, the Japanese corporation, and then Break Technologies, which were founded by Portuguese and Italian, PhDs. They were also invested by a Japanese venture capital in Japan.
Okay.
So there are a lot of success stories in Japan. So you don't have to be Japanese, but also you just do need to understand how a Japanese corporate system or the culture works if you want to get investment from Japanese corporations or VCs.
Yeah. For those who are considering entering the country, what would be the first main steps a founder should do initially to have a soft landing in Japan? Like if you give it like a steps, you already mentioned some. So if it like in a structured way, step 1, step 2, step 3, something like this.
Right. So it's important first to know if you really want to get connected with the Japan. And then secondly, you need to understand what way you would like to, approach Japan. So do you want the Japanese customers, or do you want Japanese partners, or do you want Japanese investors, or what else, right? So I think depending on what you do, it varies. So I think the easiest way is to find a Japanese business partner or a customer from abroad. You, for example, would like to work with Toyota or a Panasonic or like large Japanese corporation. Like we discussed, it's a very slow process, but generally speaking, doors are open. So I think you can approach them and then see if they're interested in your product or services, and then how they can team up. And then if they are interested in your product or service, that's a first step. So I think that's like a most likely scenario for many global founders. And another scenario is like if you already have good revenues and investments from the US investors or other investors, and then you have enough capital to open a subsidiary, just open it and then find a local representative, a partner to work for you and who knows the space. So if you're in the SaaS space, for example, if you're providing the SaaS product for enterprise, our ERP system or whatnot, and you will hire someone who's an expert, who has an expert knowledge of the space as well as Japan market. And that person can help you enter Japanese market easily. And then, that person can hire the salespeople who work for you. And then, you can take it from there. But operation is going to be really, really local and independent. So you have to trust that local, partner or the, country manager type of person who can, run its own PL, the profit loss. So I think that's another way to approach Japan, because it's still a big market, bigger than like Germany, France, or whatnot. Like it's the third largest economy, and also I think Japan's technology is really advanced in one way, but so behind another way. We're still using fax machines, and then we're using Excel spreadsheet to schedule people's time and whatnot. So there are so many, there's so much room to improve efficiency and for optimization. So I think there are plenty of space for innovative startups to come into and tap into.
Well, frankly speaking, in the US, some banks, maybe some other organizations are still using fax machines. And I haven't used fax for maybe 20 years. And like a year ago, I had to close my account just to send them a fax. That's the only way I could close my account. They didn't accept email. They have email, they don't accept this information via email. Why not? I don't really understand that. Well,
Yep.
interesting.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. The friend of mine, he's from Eastern Europe, born, actually Armenian born. He was part of the 500 Global program in San Francisco, and he's got Japanese investors on his board. And later on, he opened an office in Tokyo. So he has a team. It's a company, VCV, Video CV. And so far, he's really happy with Japanese investors. They are growing rapidly, and they have offices in multiple countries like Russia, US, Japan, some other countries, I guess, maybe Armenia. Well, so far as I heard of my close network getting Japanese investors, they were positive of working with.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, I have two more questions. So one is about taxations and cost for the companies. So in your opinion, like, can you elaborate on this? So taxes for corporate taxes and individual taxes, because people entering the country, it's might be a surprise for them. So what should they know?
Sure. So I'm not a tax expert, so I can just talk about general, like a high level, like, things I know about Japanese tax. So Japanese corporate tax is probably on par with most advanced countries. I think it's about between 25 to 40% or something like that. And then for startups, usually you don't have much profit, so you don't need to worry about corporate tax much. And the individual tax rate is really high, probably slightly lower than Scandinavian countries, but it's very high. So the tax is probably not the biggest advantage of this country. So that's one thing I need to note. In terms of incorporation, you just need to, pay to a professional to incorporate a company. There are different types of, corporations, like kabushiki gaisha, which is kind of similar to, general Delaware C Corp type of company, or godo gaisha, which is more which is closer to the LLC, like a sort of disregarded entity type of, and has a lot of flexibility in accounting and reporting. And then, a branch office and representative offices are also options. But generally speaking, to incorporate a more standard kabushiki gaisha corporation, you just need to pay let's say $500 to $1,000 to a professional, and then you can even do a process online by yourself using lots of freely available services. And then you need to pay the registration fees depending on how much paid in capital you would put in to start a company. And then, and generally speaking, I think the threshold is 5 million yen. But that doesn't mean that you can't use that money for anything. You can actually use that money for corporate purposes right away. So you just need to, evidence that you have 5 million yen, which is about 45K US dollars. And then, you are good to go. So it's not that difficult. I think opening a corporate bank account is slightly more difficult these days because of KYC purposes, but the representative director, doesn't have to be a Japanese citizen or can live outside of Japan. So a foreigner living in San Francisco, for example, theoretically can incorporate a corporation in Japan, and then make it become a subsidiary of the parent company in the United States.
I see. Can you open a company remotely and a bank account remotely from a different country?
You can incorporate a company, as far as I know, and remotely, as long as you have sort of like a delegatee or power of attorney in Japan, and then use professional services to open it for you. The corporate bank account depends on the bank. So each bank has its own, KYC processes. So depending on the bank, you might not be able to, you might be able to. Generally speaking, I think the online banks are easier to open a bank account. but nothing is guaranteed. I think it's on a case-by-case basis. So you would need to find out yourself by talking to banks.
Yeah, well, I found something on Google quickly while you were talking about taxation. Just take a look at this. Does this look right to you about corporate tax brackets on the different income levels?
Yeah, I think it looks right to me. My understanding is, generally speaking, between 25 to 40. So yes, that's about the range I've been thinking about. Yeah, so if your income is really low, so 4 million yen is about like 35K a year.
Okay.
So that's really low. So even small startups that usually have a little bit over that, so close to 25%, I would say, in the second a column. But yeah, I think this is probably correct.
All right.
Yeah, it comes with JETRO, so that's one of the government organization I talked about, which promotes and facilitates the foreign direct investment into Japan. So they support startups as well.
That's awesome.
JETRO.
So we found another resource. Well,
yeah,
Google helps all the time to answer.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but thanks for confirming this. This is important because now we have some impression of approximate tax brackets for different income levels. Well, I have a final question to you. How being in Japan ecosystem helps you reach to the US market to get US VC funding, and the same applies to VC funding and markets in Asia. So how Japanese market helps with accessing those markets in Asia and US and capital?
Good question. Frankly speaking, the US market is very competitive to get into in many ways. So having a startup in Japan doesn't guarantee or help you access to US investor base or customers or the market, to be honest. There are like I said, Japanese startups that got investments from US venture capitals as well as late stage private equity firms, like really large scale ones like KKR, Carlin. But generally speaking, Japanese startups don't necessarily lead to the US capital markets just because. But in Asia, I think Japan has a unique position in which other than Singapore, I think Japan is still a very attractive startup market and ecosystem. And then actually, I represented one Singaporean venture capital which wanted to invest into a Japanese startup. So there is definitely a keen interest in Southeast Asia in terms of venture capitals or startups that want to work with Japanese startups or want to invest into Japanese startups. And then vice versa. So I represented one Japanese venture capital which invested into Southeast Asian startup. So there is a huge like kind of wider network across Asia. And China is slightly different because it has its own market in many ways. So there's a slight disconnect. But Southeast Asia and Japan are extremely connected in many ways. And then a lot of venture capitals here have venture capitalists coming from Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore. So I think there's a growing number of interactions and wider network in Asia. So that's definitely a huge plus.
Well, thank you so much for giving so detailed answers on all my questions. I think we already open up some and got some understanding about Japanese market, and thanks to your answers, maybe some entrepreneurs may be interested in Japanese market, because every global ecosystem is giving some advantages to international founders. And I really want to see them compete between each other, because in the end of the day, all of us are benefiting out of it, and we'll see more great stuff being built by bright-minded people from different parts of the world. Well, is there anything else would you like to say before I close our talk?
Oh, thank you very much again for inviting me to this exciting podcast, and I think you're doing a great service to global startup ecosystem. And then again, I've been honored and delighted to be a part of your journey, and I hope I contributed and added small value to your to knowledge and to your podcast audience. So if you or anyone would like to discuss, Japan, Japanese startup ecosystem, angel investment, venture capitals. I have a decent network based in Tokyo and as well as other cities in Japan. So please reach out to me through yakumi.co. Yeah, I'm more than happy to help. Like Daniel said, this is a very it's a very good community where people like to help each other and to grow and then and thrive. So I'm very happy to I'm part of it.
Thank you so much for these words. I would like to say that we are planning another webinar with Yuki. Hopefully we will give you some more information soon. And those who are watching, enjoyed this talk, please give us some likes on this video, because it helps us to promote this kind of talk and share this knowledge with more entrepreneurs. Subscribe to this channel. And if you have more questions or suggestions, please discuss them in the comments. We will try to give you answers to your questions. If you want more like talks like this, if you want Yuki to be on another podcast with us, just share your questions, and we might do another talk with Yuki potentially. And also those who are fundraising right now, just be aware that Yuki also on the panel of experts and angel investors for our global initiative, Speech to Global Investors. And so you can apply it on our website. Everyone can apply. We are doing screening and scoring, and if you accept it, you will be able to pitch Yuki and other global experts from around the world. So exciting again for this for having a talk with you. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you all and you, Yuki, again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.